2 years after the overturn of Roe v. Wade, we've seen a significant shift in the consideration of reproductive health rights in the United States. Many states, and in particular in the South, host millions of people where new in effect legislation has made having an abortion completely illegal, even in cases of rape or sexual assault, but only allowable in the determination of a threat to the life of the mother. Such is the case in Alabama, and in the case of Georgia, my home state. Abortion is illegal after the detection of a fetal heartbeat, which can occur after someone even knows if they're pregnant. Healthcare providers are allowed to be prosecuted and imprisoned and/or fined if they provide this life-saving medical care to their patients. Protests have arisen across the country, demanding a change to the current legislative debate on this topic, and our country remains divided more than ever. Beyond the right to choose being lost to individuals who do not want to carry a pregnancy, there are a notable number of people in particular who want children either through fertility treatments, surrogacy, or adoption, but are disadvantaged from doing so. A significant number of queer people may choose to pursue these avenues in the case of wanting a child. And in fact, 63% of LGBTQ individuals building a family reported going through one of these three methods in a survey from Family Equality. But many states have not made this option easier, or insurance companies have placed significant barriers that provide a cissexual privilege towards those wanting to conceive. FYI, if you're not in a heterosexual relationship or have a primary cause of infertility, you may not be eligible for assisted reproductive technology, surrogacy, or adoption. Adoption companies may even discriminate against same-sex individuals, such as a person or couple from an LGBTQ-affirming country, wanting to adopt from a country where same-sex couple adoption is not allowed, or vice versa. Navigating these waters of childbearing can be extremely challenging for people wanting to control their decision to have children. In the midst of these discussions, several organizations and or groups have remained outspoken in promoting the right to choose and freedom from barriers regarding reproduction for women, transgender non-binary individuals, and anyone with reproductive health needs. This belief is a central tenet of the reproductive justice movement, and one of its main founders is the group Sister Song, calling itself a Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective, given many racially minoritized individuals were involved in the movement's founding. Thankfully, this website lists the names and contact info of over 100 providers. One LGBTQ-affirming person who I found while searching this page was Khye Tyson, who is here to speak with us today about their role as a sacred transition guide, reproductive health doula, consultant, and trainer based in Atlanta, Georgia. Everyone, welcome back to the Equity Podcast. I am super excited to be talking with our guest today, Khye Tyson.
Hello. I'm so excited to be here.
Yay.
Yes.
Alrighty. Let's go ahead and give you your introduction. So I have Khye's bio. So Khye is an unapologetic Southern queer Black femme who enjoys yoga, building community, laughing, subverting the gender binary, and reminding people that they can fire their doctors. Khye is a sacred transition guide, entrepreneur, healer, consultant, and educator working toward a world in which Black, queer, and trans people, women, and femmes can live, thrive, and raise healthy families freely within a healthy community. It sounds amazing. It really does. It sounds amazing. Learn more about Khye and their work at Kuluntu.center, which we will get to. And let me just spell it out. That is KULUNTU.center. Is that correct?
Yes, that's it. You got it.
Amazing. I'm so happy to have you on. This episode is focusing on reproductive justice in the queer community. Reproductive justice is a term that people may or may not have heard of, but it stems from a movement based in minoritized people, particularly Black women, standing up and speaking out on control over one's body and being able to make decisions that was in opposition, and correct me if I'm wrong, that was in opposition to the main women's voices that were heard, which were white women at the time. And so their considerations involve social injustice issues, which we talk about a lot on the podcast. So I came across your page after searching on Sister Song's website, a woman of color reproductive justice collective, as it's so named, and one of the first of its kind, showing people from a range of backgrounds in healthcare, social justice, nonprofits, and more. I believe I typed in queer. I went in the search box, right? And I was like, let me see if I can see anyone on this page who is queer affirming, right? And out of that page, so many people came up. And your name did. How do you
Yay.
see your work fitting within the continuum of LGBTQIA plus affirming health services? And in your bio, you said you're not afraid to fire doctors. So I guess you wouldn't be afraid to fire me.
Please.
So you're working within this space. Was that always a goal when you first started out to work in that space?
Yeah. When I first started out, I didn't know what I was doing when I first started out. Like, I think I was just kind of trying to figure out what birth work even was when I first started out. And I had been involved in reproductive justice spaces, and I had been involved in different like social justice movement spaces, but like connecting that to this work as a doula and as a birth worker, I didn't realize that those worlds, when I first started anyways, were not very connected. And so then I got there, I got into these doula spaces, and I'm like, dang, they need some queers in here. Like they need some
Right,
they need
right,
some critical analysis and different things. And so it's been, I'd say the past few years, we've had a lot more conversations in like birth
right.
spaces, and especially around like birth justice. And since folks are kind of leaning towards birth justice, I'm always kind of there to remind folks like that includes queer folks, and that includes trans folks and disabled folks.
It does.
It includes people that you don't always think about if you're a cishet woman. But yeah, I see my work as a doula in general fitting in, helping folks find that autonomy and helping folks figure out like, what do I want in this birth experience or this abortion experience or my fertility journey, and how can I advocate for myself? But then, of course, for queer folks, that's like quadruple important. For queer Black folks and queer people with multiple marginalized identities, that's like so much more important, because we are so often mistreated or treated like a sideshow or whatever in these medical spaces. And you're having to explain to your doctor how hormones work or whatever the case is. And like, it's even more so important in birth, where Black folks are 2 to 3 times more likely to die during or after childbirth, where Black infants are 3 to 4 times more likely to die before they turn 1. And knowing that being a Black, queer, and trans person, that those odds are even higher for us, because we have to navigate these systems with even more marginalized identities on top of just being Black. So yeah, I don't know if that was my goal when I started out, but once I got into those birthing spaces, I was like, why are y'all not talking about reproductive justice in these birth spaces? Why are y'all not talking about intersectionality in these birth spaces? Why am I the only queer person here? Or the only, maybe back then I wasn't the only queer person, but it sure felt like it.
Yeah. No,
And
I get that. I
yeah,
I, I get that
so
100%.
I acknowledge that there might have been some other folks in the room, but a lot of times I
Yeah.
was the only vocal queer person. I was the only queer person who kind of made it a point to spotlight queer folks in those spaces. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think there's so much to unpack there. There really is. One of the things that speaks to me is you saying that not only, right, was there that aspect of you saw that there was a missing focus on queer folks, but then as well that for you, being in that space as a queer person, as a provider, there was a gap in relating to other people talking about these issues. And that's kind of the downside. It's twofold. It sounds like it's like not only on the provider side, but it's also on the patient side and what their experiences are. And yeah, like how do we bridge those together? And that's what
Yeah.
really inspired me about your page was it was very much open and focused on talking about queer issues, talking about Black issues. And another important point to highlight is what we traditionally say, right, maternal mortality, but we can really just call it pregnancy mortality, right? And talking about how Black individuals and trans or queer individuals, if we're going to be very much encompassing of all the people who fall under that umbrella, are likely more at risk, right? Because they're either not taken seriously, they're not wanting to go to a healthcare provider, the healthcare provider doesn't give them what they need or something like that. And so that's why it's so important what you do. And it really caught my eye when I read that you describe yourself as a sacred transition guide, giving people space or guidance on how to navigate transitions of their own. And I'm curious, how do you consider that term sacred when you talk about the work that you do? And in what ways do you respect sanctity? I believe that's the word.
Yeah, that's the word.
That's the word. I think that's the word.
It. Yeah.
Pertaining to the transitions of the clients you work with.
Yeah. I kind of, a couple of years ago, kind of had like I don't want to call it an epiphany. I don't know if it's that serious, but I had a thought that, like, people will say like, oh, the miracle of life, or, birth is a miracle and whatever. Like, I'm neurodivergent, so I'm real particular about the definitions of words. And like a miracle is like something that happens rarely, right? Or it's something that's like very unlikely. And most of us have siblings, so having a baby isn't so rare that people are only doing it one time most of the time. And for some folks that is rare. We can talk about fertility and all that, but just in general, birth is fairly regular, right? It's not really a miracle like on a regular day. But I was like, that doesn't mean that it's not just as magical or just as important. It just means it's not rare. And so then I kind of landed on the word sacred. Like, it's sacred because it's sacred. It's bringing life into this world, but it's not. Like, spending time with your family is sacred, but hopefully it's not rare. That doesn't mean that it's not important.
Right. It doesn't need to be like uncommon or
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I kind of came up with sacred, but just thinking about like birth is a transition, obviously. It's multiple transitions on multiple levels. And for a minute I was considering becoming a death doula, and like death is the ultimate transition. Right. And so just thinking about,
which I read about, by the way, I didn't even know death doulas.
Yeah, death doulas. I don't have enough time or brain power to become a death doula, but I admire them a lot. But just like that, there's, and there's gender transition doulas, and there's doulas who work with folks who are having abortions or fertility and all different types of doulas. And so I kind of realized that, yeah, being a doula is just somebody who's helping someone else through a transition. Like, I feel like divorce doulas should be a thing. Like, I would love, if I could make up my own job, I would love to be a puberty doula, not for the kids. I think the kids are fine. I think the parents are who needs the puberty doula, because parents be having a lot of big feelings around puberty. And like, how a lot of times it's just kind of like, oh, go through this experience, like get married or go to college or whatever, go through this experience. But how often are there people there to actually like help you through it? And I used to work in education and in colleges, and like they do all these studies and they have all these statistics, and they can almost pinpoint like who is more likely to drop out of school, right? And so then they will have different interventions and things to help those particular people. Like, okay, if you are a low-income student, here are some specific programs to help you so that you don't drop out. And part of those are helping people transition into the environment and transition out of the environment and getting a job and, whatever, or going to grad school or whatever their experience is. And so, what would it look like if we had that type of support for people when they're having babies or when they're dying or when they're going through a big transition in their personal life, whatever that may look like, if they're getting a divorce or if they're figuring out their fertility or if they're deciding not to have a baby. Because that's transition from pregnant to not pregnant. And folks still need care around those different transitions. And so what would it look like to guide people? And I do yoga. So one of the things that I love what yoga teachers say is like, yeah, we call them yoga teachers, but they'll say like, I'm not your teacher. I'm just guiding you on this journey. Like, you can do whatever you want, your yoga mat. I'm just guiding you through these particular poses that might be helpful for you, and you take what works and you leave the rest. And so, I love that idea. Like, I'm not an expert. I don't even have no kids. I'm not an expert. I'm just someone who can make space
Right.
for you
But
during
you
that
understand,
transition.
you don't have to have kids though, right? Like you
Right.
understand why this is sacred, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So yeah, and little auntie energy and just trying to be there for folks
Totally.
as they're going through all these different transitions because it's a lot. And
Hmm.
folks got to go back to work 2 weeks after having a baby. Like, we don't always have space in this society to
It's
like,
crazy. Yeah.
to process emotionally, physically, to heal all those different things. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of how I see that role of like, I'm going to carve out this space, even if everything else around you is hectic or whatever. I've carved out this space for us to process emotionally, or for you to ask questions, or for you to talk about what you're scared of, so that this transition can hopefully go a little bit more smoothly and so that you can prepare for it a little bit better.
What an amazing response. Oh my gosh. You
Thank
give
you.
so many gems. And I really liked how you went into like, you were like, well, let's back up. There's so many types of doulas.
There really are. Yeah.
And how amazing is that? Like, can we recognize that? Wow. And you said something for me that really hit, which was the gender transition one as
Mm-hmm.
well. And I never looked into it, but how nice, right? Like when I was first starting out with my transition, like how nice to think about, oh my goodness, like if I had somebody there to like walk with me, like with these steps. And I think
Yeah.
that when we talk about the sacred and the sanctity of a transition, right? I think really what comes to mind is like people are really vulnerable.
Uh-huh.
People are in
Yeah.
a time like they can be hurt by multitude of things. Something is going on that almost seems like this coming from my experience. Sometimes my transition has felt like it's kind of out of my control in a way. Like
Yeah.
it's almost as if things are going at a pace where other things need to be on pause so I can let that shine. I can let that go. And it helps when you have the support system. And that's exactly what doulas do, right? They're that base for people, right?
Yeah.
If you would agree. And
Yeah.
so that's incredible. That's incredible. There's just so much there. And speaking about, I kind of want to just really pop into like the sexual and gender minorities conversation, right? When we talk about lesbian, gay, bisexual, or trans people. So, sexual and gender minorities can and do become pregnant. Once in a congressional meeting, Dr. Kiara Bridges, reproductive health anthropologist and lawyer, commented on this fact to Senator Hawley of Missouri. And there's a video of that, and I watch it quite often, to be honest, because it's amazing how many people would deny that that is possible and that these people do exist, that the people you help don't exist, right? Isn't that
Mm-hmm.
crazy? Unfortunately, a significant number of people in the country would either reject the idea that lesbian couples or gay couples can or should conceive children, as well as that trans men or non binary people aren't capable of pregnancy. These ideas open these individuals to stigma, violence, and even potentially death. In fact, a study from 2022 out of a nationwide LGBTQ plus survey showed that 36% of trans respondents who reported a pregnancy also reported considering ending a pregnancy, and 19% reported attempting to do so without clinical supervision. Y'all, that is so, so dangerous. I can't even emphasize that point even more. Clearly, we can recognize the need for healthcare of SGM people in pregnancy is both a need and what seems like is being made an obstacle at this point, right? That these people can't get into good healthcare, can't have their needs supported. So, in your work that you've been up to, and you were just on assignment, you told me with somebody who was giving birth, and we had to actually even delay this conversation. I mean, you're really with them, you're really in there with them. What feedback do you receive from your queer clients specifically? And what do they say about working with you, either being affirmed in their identity or their partners even speaking with you?
Yeah. First off, that statistic, I hadn't actually heard that. I'm curious about the survey, so I'll have to get back to you about that one because, yeah, that's,
Isn't it crazy? And
yeah,
actually, I'll put the citation in there, but
yeah.
I believe that might come from a publication from the Commonwealth Fund.
Okay.
I'll send it to you actually, so you can
Yeah,
like look it up.
please.
But yeah, that's written down.
Yeah. Nah, I mean, I believe it, and it's wild. But the things I've heard from my queer and trans clients, So a lot of my clients are looking for a queer doula specifically, and they're hoping to find a queer doula to go through this experience with them. So, and I'm in Atlanta, so I mean, there's a lot of queer folks here. There's
Shout out to the
usually
A.
like, yeah, the A is something else. It's what the community is. We're big on like, oh, go to this person, if you need this thing, this doctor you can trust, or we're real big on like referrals. And so usually
Right.
people will find me and my work through word of mouth, either from other queer folks or like organizers, queer organizers, reproductive justice organizations. They'll refer, which I really appreciate. But yeah, for a lot of queer clients, it's just like that feeling when you take your bra off at the end of the day where you can just like take a deep breath and like relax. Like,
Woo!
yeah, that
Yes.
exactly that.
Yes.
Oh, and so I think, for a lot of my clients, they've said things like, I'm glad you get it. Like, I'm glad that I don't have to explain X, Y,
Yeah.
and
You don't have
Z
to
to you.
explain.
That you understand the context around which I say certain things or do certain things or how I move. And so I think for a lot of queer folks, it's like, I know I need a doula, so I'll do whatever I need to do to get a doula. But like, I'm really glad I can find a queer doula who can relate in those types of ways. And especially even like my clients that are like queer and Southern, I'm like, oh, I get it. Don't worry, I get it.
Child,
Like,
because that's another whole conversation.
yeah, like, oh,
Right.
how's your relationship with your
Yes.
family of origin? Like, oh, we from Kentucky. I'm like, oh, I get it. Never mind. Like, I understand.
Do they come to Atlanta like to work with you, or like how does it work, or do you go to them? I mean, how does
As far as so like labor clients are in person in Atlanta and like postpartum and things like that. But I'm a full spectrum doula, so I've kind of mentioned, but like fertility, abortion,
so important?
labor, postpartum, like a lot of different
Right.
areas I'm supporting folks. And so like a couple years ago, I had some clients who were like virtual, who were in other parts of the country and who were fertility doula clients or like in their early stages of their pregnancy. Or some folks will like find my information online, like on Instagram or something, and they'll reach out and say, hey, do you know anybody in Missouri, West Virginia,
Right.
wherever? Because, a lot of queer folks are in the cities, but it's some folks out in the cut. And,
Yeah.
they need support just as much as queer folks who are in the larger cities. And so I try to connect folks to people that are closer to them, at least. Like, I usually don't take on long distance clients if there's an option. Like, if they're like, I'm in the middle of nowhere and, I don't have access to anyone else, then that's one thing. But
Yeah.
usually I'm like, it's probably better if you have a doula or a birth worker who knows the context of the environment you're in. They know more of the like local resources because we know a lot of folks are food insecure and housing insecure and need help finding jobs or different things like that. And then, doulas
Right.
are when that work too of like, hey, go to this place on Tuesday at 10 a.m. and you can get
Right.
some canned food, go over here on Thursday. And so it's hard to do that when you're not local with folks. But I've also done like larger programming, like group. I actually just we launched our first Black, queer, and trans perinatal support group because there were no support groups for pregnant and postpartum people that were like, there were groups that were specific to Black folks, but of course, there's not going to be a
Right.
lot of queer and trans folks there. And then there's the queer groups, which is going to be mostly white people. And, that can go one way or another. And so I wanted to create a space for Black folks so that we could have our own little enclave with each other. And so there's things like that too. So technically, I don't necessarily call folks who come to the support groups my clients, but I kind of lump them in the same category because they're pregnant, queer, and trans folks and postpartum. And I really try to listen to all the different people that I interact with, their needs and their desires and the things they're
Yeah.
struggling with. And so I kind of take that back and I do trainings and stuff with organizations. And
You
so I
do.
try to, communicate like this is what these families are asking for and this is what these families are missing in their care and things like that. So, yeah.
Right. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Congratulations.
Thank
Congratulations
you.
on the
Thank
support
you.
group. That's amazing.
Thank you. I'm
Support
very
groups are
excited.
super, super, super needed. I was just talking to Stuart, who was on an episode that's dropping today on cancer health disparities, talking about support groups for queer patients with breast cancer. A new
Yeah.
one that started in that, and that's happening in the United Kingdom. And thinking about that segment of the population, oh my goodness, I'm just thinking about, I mean, I'm getting a little bit off topic, but like I was reading a book by Audre Lorde called The Cancer Journals, and
Hmm.
she was talking about losing her breast, but also feeling inadequate about her body, and also feeling like her journey with her breast was unique as somebody who's also in a queer relationship with another woman, and how like that was impacting her. It was so authentic to read. But just going back to what you were saying on the multitude of services that you offer, I want to highlight that you are a full spectrum doula and that you do work with people who are going through abortions or fertility. Now, with the fertility, also include like people trying to conceive themselves, or also like helping people through like a surrogacy or adoption. Do you also work with people who are going through that as well?
I haven't actually worked with folks navigating adoption or surrogacy before. That would be interesting, but I haven't done that work. Usually with fertility,
Hmm.
I'm working with either like queer women couples or trans men. I've worked with my most recent client is a transmasc non-binary person. And so yeah, as far as fertility, they're usually looking at like freezing their eggs and assisted reproductive technology and acquiring
Okay.
sperm and,
Yeah.
known donor versus unknown donor and like navigating the financial part of that and
Oh,
insurance and
yeah.
all that.
Oh
So
my
that's,
gosh.
yeah, that's a whole like five headaches in one. So, yeah, the fertility
Woo.
journey it can be frustrating anyways, but then as a queer person or a trans person, like for a lot of insurance companies, for example, you have to be diagnosed with infertility before they'll cover certain treatments. And so to
Right.
be diagnosed with infertility, it means, and I think the definition varies depending on who you ask, but it basically means that like after you've been trying to have a baby for a certain period of time and you have not been successful. So sometimes they'll say 6 months, sometimes they'll say a year. And so for a cis het couple, it's, you've been, my first thought in my head was you've been raw dogging for a year. But I don't got no good sense. But you've
That's
been, yeah.
okay. This is not the show where you have to have good sense. We
Okay.
just
I was
talk.
like, I feel like
Right.
I can say that here, but
That's okay.
anyway. But yeah, you've been trying to have a baby for a year.
Right.
And for whatever reason it hasn't happened. And so if you're queer, if you don't have access to sperm like that, then how do you become eligible for this diagnosis that will make your insurance pay for this treatment? And so some doctors, are the cool queer doctors and they'll just say that you have infertility. They'll write it down and make it sound however it needs to sound so that you can get what you need. But some doctors are not like that. And they'll,
Right.
it's like when you go to the doctor for like a broken finger or something and they're like, oh, are you pregnant? And, we're going to give you a pregnancy test anyways, even though it has nothing
Random.
to do with
They
what
love
you're
to throw
here
that in
for.
there.
And even if I told you I'm queer and I don't have sex with people with
Yeah.
penises,
Yeah.
you're still gonna, give me a pregnancy test. It's like that same kind of energy. And so for a lot of folks, it's finding those doctors who are affirming, finding those doctors who have experience with queer folks, especially the reproductive endocrinologist, which is the provider who might work with you when you're going through IVF or IUI. And so, like, finding a doctor, because, all the fertility clinics will say we're queer friendly just by virtue of having a lot of queer clients, because, queer folks need assisted reproductive technology a lot. But just because
Yes.
you have queer clients doesn't mean that you're queer friendly or that you're competent and in working with queer folks that you're going to respect their identities. It just
Right.
means that there's only 3 clinics in the city and somebody's inevitably going to work with you. It doesn't necessarily mean that they had a good experience.
Right.
So, a lot of those similar things you have to navigate during pregnancy of like bodily autonomy and informed consent and all that. It's similar with the fertility journey. And on top of that, you got to navigate insurance and all these hoops you got to jump through. Like some insurance companies will, like, they'll only pay for IVF after you've gone through a certain number of rounds of IUI, which is the IVF is in vitro fertilization, and it costs a lot more and it's a lot more invasive than
Yeah. Thank you
IUI,
for
which
explaining
is,
that. Yeah.
yeah. just intrauterine insemination. And so intrauterine insemination is like the turkey baster joke. It's kind of like a
Right. When
medical
Melanie
turkey
did that on the
baster.
game. Right.
Right. Yeah. But like it's like that, but it's
Oh
more
no, look at
precise.
Melanie.
It's it's more precise. So there's it's a higher chance
Right.
of taking than just like you at home with a turkey baster. But and it's cheaper than IVF. But say your insurance says you got to go through 6 rounds of IUI before IVF. That means potentially
Right.
you could go through the process of getting your hopes up, hoping that you're pregnant, taking the test, and then getting let down 6 times before you can go to IVF, which has a higher success rate. But assisted reproductive technology overall, if you look at the success rates, are fairly low. I don't know them off the top of my head, but it's like less than 50%, the
Right.
success rate, which means you're going to have to, most of the time, do it multiple times, which means there's a lot of medications involved. Like with IVF, you have to like inject yourself with hormones and different things to stimulate your follicles. And there's a lot of emotions involved as far as like maybe this will be the time and hoping that it works. And some folks, their fertility journey, they're trying to have a baby for 5 years or longer, 8 years, 10 years, I've heard. And so like
Right.
there's a lot of emotions wrapped up into all that, and then being queer on top of all that, and folks having strong opinions about whether or not queer folks should be parents, and all that can really weigh on you. And it's hard. It can be really hard, and it can be really isolating as queer people because there's not a lot of spaces in the queer community where we're talking about these kind of things. A lot of
Right.
times in the queer
Or
community, we
in
party.
POC, BIPOC, right, as well, queer communities, right?
Yeah, yeah, right. And so like a lot of community spaces are geared towards younger folks, and they're around like partying and late night and drinking and whatever else, and like that's
Yep.
fine. But we're the grown and sexy queer folks talking about building families and all that kind of stuff. And so
Like that. I
there's
like
a
that. Yeah.
lack of
Yeah.
those spaces, and I think that can contribute to like a generational divide in the queer community. And so yeah, I think we should have way more of those spaces and conversations.
We definitely should. We definitely are. That's where you're stepping in. You're stepping in, you're guiding them, you're with them, you're supporting, you're listening, and that's what it sounds like they definitely want from a doula and from somebody who is going to identify with or respect their experiences if they're a not getting respected when they're going for a fertility visit, b they don't receive the proper care that they need to handle a situation, or c if they're experiencing some sort of inequity compared to a cisgender or heterosexual couple. And that's really the issue here is like when queer individuals are going into a visit, right? When they are trying to interact with assisted reproductive technology or they are trying to have an abortion, are they getting the same treatment? Are they getting respected at the same level as somebody who is coming from a different background? And then when you add that intersectionality component, it can become even harder for people to feel listened to. And so that's why I find it so valuable that we have doulas, that we have, as you described yourself, sacred transition guides, right? To be able to, if somebody had a bad day, for you probably to step in and say, let's talk about it, right? Like, how was that experience? How can I be of support and all that? And so I'm really, really, really happy about what you do. And it just means so much. It really does. So speaking a little bit more broadly, the historical origins of the reproductive justice movement are extensive. I talked about it a little bit, right? It's dating back to social justice movement, predominantly starting in the 90s by Black women speaking up for the community, the people of our lower socioeconomic status, marginalized race. We live in a time, right? It's been 2 years since the overturn of Roe v. Wade. And I'm sure that that has also been interesting for you, maybe, like, because I'm sure you were working before then and then it happened and then now you're working after. I'm kind of curious, how has that been? Have you noticed any significant changes in the work that you do since that's happened? And like, what just comes to mind when we talk about Roe v. Wade for you? Like, what are like the first things that come to mind?
Well, I'm in Georgia, so the overturn of Roe v. Wade has been real significant here. The majority of my clients are people who are either pregnant on purpose or desired to be pregnant. and desire to have their baby. And so as far as
Yeah.
my like day-to-day clients, I haven't seen much of a difference, but I will say like on a larger scale, and like I said before, like I do trainings and
Right.
consulting and different things with organizations, whether they're like public health organizations, community-based organizations, medical organizations. And so, you know, folks the past 2 years have wanted to talk a lot more about abortion. And so I feel like before the overturn of Roe v. Wade, it was kind of like people took it for granted that abortion was accessible. And it wasn't super accessible in the South. Like, even before all of this, like Georgia had a
Yeah.
15-week ban, and I traveled with a client to Maryland to have an
You
abortion. I
did.
think it was at like 22 weeks or 23 weeks, maybe.
Oh, wow.
And so, you know, there's still we were still traveling and having to do all that before Roe passed, but now it's like
Right.
now that people have kind of woken up, I guess, like I think a lot of people didn't think that we would actually lose Roe v. Wade, but since that happened, a lot of folks have kind of woken up and been like, oh, okay, let me pay attention. So I mean, yeah, so a lot of like regular people, for lack of a better word, have started to like, how can I, you know, engage with this, or how can I help with this? And so like
Right.
being an abortion doula before Roe passed was almost like something you would kind of say in like hushed tones in the South. Like, oh yeah, I'm, you know, if you need something, like, or say it like with a euphemism, like I'm a
Right.
full spectrum doula. So if you need anything, let me know. And since
Oh, okay.
Roe passed, people are like, a lot of birth workers are like, I need training. I need this training. I need to learn about how I
Yeah.
can support people. Two, they're also like a lot more willing to say like, I'm an abortion doula, or like I help people with abortions. Like the South
Yeah.
is still very much like respectability politics, and Southern Christianity got us in a chokehold. And so like it's not easy to, even in Atlanta too, like there's a lot of that even in the larger cities, but it's not easy. It wasn't easy to have those conversations. And now everybody's like, oh, this is really important. We didn't think it was actually going to get taken away. So let's like figure out how we can mobilize now. And so, yeah, I think that's been the
Yeah.
main difference that I've seen, which is, you know, is good. But at the same time, like, since the urgency can only take you so far, and for it to be a sustained movement of people really advocating for their needs, it has to be more than just that sense of urgency. It has to be like an ongoing thing that we're contributing to because we care about our bodily autonomy, not just because, oh, my immediate need has been disrupted. And I think people were comfortable, but even though abortion wasn't accessible to a lot of us, it was accessible enough, I guess,
Yeah.
and people felt okay about it. But
Right.
yeah, now it's not as accessible, and people are scrambling, and the chaotic, hectic energy is, I don't think, the best way of organizing and doing this work in a way that's sustainable. But also, I appreciate that people are paying more attention. So it's a both
Right.
and.
To both ends. But what you said about the majority of your work being involved with individuals who would like to be pregnant or desire to be pregnant, that speaks to the majority of the people that you serve. But then there are those people, like you said, like you had to go to Maryland, right? And what a journey, right? To be with them. And that just shows how dedicated you are, right? To the work that you do, right? To being there with them when they're going through an abortion or they're going through a fertility experience. And so I think that's incredible, right? That while our world becomes smaller in terms of what is being allowed to happen, particularly speaking in the United States, because we're talking about Roe v. Wade, but just overall internationally, when we talk about reproductive justice, right? Like who is standing up and who is sustaining that pushback, right? More now than ever, we need to be discussing reproductive justice. More now than ever, we need people to be hand in hand, allies, as well as those directly affected, to being able to support the control over one's body. And so I definitely think that the Kaluntu Reproductive Justice Center is interceding in that effort. And so I wanted to definitely talk about your center. We haven't talked about that as of yet, but how incredible that the Kaluntu Center, and also, if am I saying Kaluntu right?
Yeah, I use it's Kaluntu, like a little bit more ooh instead of like Kaluntu, but
Oh,
it's It's all good.
No, I want to say it right. It deserves to be said right. Because isn't it, okay, here, I'm going to say this wrong too, but I'm going to just say it. Is it Gosa? Isn't that the language that it comes from?
Yes. And from my understanding, it's also like with the click at the beginning. So,
Okay,
yeah.
Gosa, right? Like a little,
Yeah.
yeah, kind of
Yeah.
like that. I was
You got
practicing
it.
it. I was practicing it, friend. I was trying.
You got it.
No, because here, no, here on the Equity Podcast, we respect people's communities and we respect people claiming names and reclaiming those names. And so I just want to make sure I'm
Yeah.
saying it right. So Kaluntu
Mhm.
Center has been around since 2019. And that word Kaluntu means community. Your organization offers services, partnerships with families, organizations, and birth workers, as you've already talked about. You do trainings, right? You have
Mhm.
support groups, you have readings. Actually, I was on your Notion a little bit.
Okay.
I love like don't even get me started. I love Notion. I love Notion. It's just the organization platform, y'all. It sounds like there's room for several people to participate in what you provide. So we've kind of talked about it a little bit. I mean, you partner with a lot of different groups. You've discussed the efforts that you're primarily involved in. I'm sort of curious, what would you consider your most often used or successful programs under that umbrella of the center in general? Is it the birth work that you're doing? Is it the support groups? I guess not because it's new, but you also do the training. So, like, how is your time kind of split up?
I'd say the majority of my time is doing the trainings and the consulting and things like that.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, and different projects. And then, yeah, I don't take on clients too often. A lot of doulas, they take on a lot of clients, but I can't do that because it's so much emotional labor and it's so much like time and energy that you put towards folks. Like I want to get to know them well and, really take time to not integrate into their family so much, but just like understand how they tick so that I can like
Right.
help them in ways that make sense for them. And I personally cannot do that with multiple people really at
Right.
a time. I'd be having like one client at a time.
You
Um,
found what works for you, right?
yeah, and also being a doula is it's a high turnover occupation because it's
Oh, really?
you're exposed to so much trauma, you're exposed to so much harm that's being caused in this medical system. And so
Yes.
for a lot of folks, it's very high turnover, high burnout. And so doula is like 10% of my work, I think.
Okay. Wow. Did it start
Yeah.
that way? It's
My
not because you. Yeah.
intention
Yeah.
started out to be a full-time doula, and then I quickly realized that it's difficult and it's not possible for me and my brain and my body. And then, in order to run a business that is sustainable, you have to make money. And so I realized very quickly that the consulting and the trainings, that I could be more sustainable as a business, focusing on those. But also I realized too that like as far as the reach of my words or the reach of my work, like working with individual families is great. But if I'm working with these organizations or I'm working with,
Right.
doing things virtually versus in person, like I can reach more people. And so, like, if I'm training a group of doulas who's gonna then, say a group of 20 doulas who over a year sees 200 people, then that's a way bigger reach than if I were only working with individual families. Um,
Oh. Oh, I
so
see what you're saying.
yeah, so
Yeah.
I'd say the majority of my work, like right now in 2024, it's hard to say like what's my most popular or most successful program because it's always changing. Like the nature of the business is that it changes with whatever the needs are. So right now, a lot of people,
That's great though. Yeah.
yeah. So and that's what I wanted it to be was like very grassroots and like what do people actually need right now. And so right now it's abortion. Like I was saying, like a lot of folks are wanting this
Right.
information around how to support people in going through abortions, whether it's a surgical abortion at a clinic or a self-managed abortion with medication at home. And
Right.
so, yeah, the abortion doula training, I've been working with two organizations to help put together a Georgia specific abortion doula training, talking about like the context of the state of Georgia and how people are struggling to get their needs met. And I would say that, yeah, people are really excited about that. People want that information.
Right.
Other things, like I said, yeah, there's a support group that's just started, so I can't say it's my most successful. But previously, with the trainings, what the most popular training ends up being is always like the 101, like supporting queer and trans families 101, because a lot of people
That's
don't
so
have that
good.
information. It's not my favorite thing to do because I like to have these real deep philosophical conversations about the system of gender. That's like my bag that I
Really?
really want to get into. But folks are like,
Oh, okay.
what are these, what are the
So,
laws?
oh, I see. It's like very much like people learning for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that that information is needed and I appreciate that people want that information, but also the energy behind it is different. Like the intention when people are like, so I have one training called Redefining Family. So it's about, I talk about like the nuclear family structure and like the history of it and where it came from and also how it's harmful. And then I talk about Black ways and queer ways of building families that's way beyond the nuclear family structure. When we're talking about like play cousins, we're talking about like
Yeah.
houses, queer and trans houses, drag
Yes.
houses, ball houses,
Oh my
like,
gosh. Yes. Shout out to Poe.
chosen family, right? We're talking about chosen family. We're talking about House of
Right.
LaBeija. We're talking about all of that. And then within that context, this is how you can care for queer and trans people who are building their families.
Yeah.
But the 101 is very much like, what does the L stand for? What does the G stand for? And some people need that information and there's no shame in it, but it can get redundant and a lot of times when people take those 101 type trainings, their intention is just like, let me check off this box so that, I'm an ally or whatever. And it's like that's not why people should engage with that type of information. I feel like you should engage because you care and because your liberation is wrapped up in mine, not because, oh, I don't want to say the wrong thing and I don't want to get canceled.
Ah,
Like,
it goes deeper than somebody's particular need to not offend someone else per se, but what do you
right,
actually hold in regards to this community? How do you actually value them as your fellows in this
right.
world, as your peers, right? As your children, even like, right.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's the difference. Like if somebody's coming to, the 101 and they want to learn deeply, that's one thing, but a lot of
Yeah.
times it's like, "Oh, well, can you just, come in and talk to my organization about this so that we can say that we got trained?" And, sometimes people do that kind of stuff to try to cover up harm that was already caused or harm that may potentially be caused or, whatever the case is. But it's like the diversity training, right? Like, oh, well, I took a diversity training, but you're still saying microaggressions or you're still misgendering people or you're still saying the wrong, like, not the wrong thing, but you're still harming people with your language or you're harming people with your
Exactly.
actions or whatever. But a lot of times, like, yeah, that 101 is like a band aid. And it's like, if you really want deeper cultural change in your organization, it's got to be way more than this little 2-hour training. And so I'm actually moving away from doing those types of trainings. Like if you want that deeper study type situation, or if you want to really look at, your operations of your organization and like see like where can we be more affirming of queer and trans people? Where can we be more accepting? Then like that's one thing. But that little 2-hour training, like you're not gonna come out of that like, oh, I'm not transphobic anymore. Like that's not how that works. So yeah.
No, no. I honestly didn't even expect for us to even get into this, but like the aspect of the people who are doing the work, who are the doulas, who are the birth workers, right? And why are they involved
Mhm.
in assisting, helping, however you call it, working with queer clients? Like, how are they involved in that work? And like, what is their motivation? Like
Yeah.
that part. And I love that you are thoughtful. Like, you are actually wanting to do it for a reason. And that goes just beyond yourself, right? And obviously, like, I think a lot of people in like, the healthcare field or just in like the client space field, if we call it that, like get into it because they're like, oh, I want to help people. But it's also about how are you mindful of the population you're working with? It's not just that you want to help people. It's not just that you want to be an ally, right? It's not just that you want to be seen a certain way. It's also about why is this work going to advance our humanity overall? Like, how are we
Yeah.
actually going to move forward as a unit, right? And like being able to respect people and also say like what's affecting you is also affecting me is so deeply ingrained in what we do, but yet like on the surface level, people just see it in another way. And so I love that you're being mindful of that. And I guess I agree with you. Like, no shame in like wanting that training. We all have to start from somewhere. I
Right.
understand that. Like, I'm not going to judge anybody who wants to know anything about stuff that I know about because I don't know a lot of stuff about things that other people know about. And that's why I have this podcast to talk to people, right? To learn and for the
Yeah.
listeners and people watching to learn. But ultimately, the work involves seeing from that other perspective. And so, one of my last questions is what types of support do you find exist for you or other birth workers who are coming from the LGBT plus affirming space? Like, what exists for y'all? Do you have any connections with other people? Like, how do you kind of take care of yourself as you're going through this? Because you're seeing what's going on and it's probably affecting you too.
Yeah, yeah, like the secondary trauma is so real and when you're a birth worker. Honestly, a lot of the support specifically for queer and trans birth workers is created by queer and trans birth workers. Like we have our
Mhm.
own little micro community within the birth work community. Like a lot of birth workers are on Instagram, and so a lot of us connected through there. And so we promote
Mhm.
each other's stuff, and we're connecting and learning about each other's work and all that kind of stuff. But like, there's like the Queer Doula Network that's like a directory for queer doulas that was created by a queer doula. I'm in this group on Signal that's like, it's just like trans birth workers, but we have like a monthly get together, a monthly like Zoom gathering that
Right.
was put together
Good.
by a trans doula named Moss. I'm trying to think if there's other like, I don't know if there's any particular like healing spaces. I know I've seen some like pop-up support groups or like pop-up gatherings or like pop-up like
Right. But
Black
nothing
queer birth
consistent, maybe.
worker.
Yeah.
Yeah, not that I can think of off the top of my head. Like I could, I don't know everything and I got ADHD, so my mind be slipping sometimes, but I don't think there's anything consistent, but it's like a lot of other things. Like we create those things for ourselves. We create them for each other. Like I created a get together. I mean, it wasn't really a whole situation. It was really just like I had finally met 5 or 6 other Black birth workers in Atlanta like a few months ago. I was like, hey, let's all get together and like we have a little potluck and like meet each other. And some of us knew each
Yeah.
other, like 2 or 3 of us knew each other, but I think there were 7 or 8 people on the list. And then like 5 or 6 people came together that first time. And like a lot of us hadn't met each other and just like being able to be in the same space with each other. And like it
Yeah.
wasn't all doulas, like there were like lactation consultants and an OBGYN and like other folks who work in birth spaces
Oh,
who
okay.
are
Yeah.
not necessarily doulas, but just like gathering because there's so few of us that we're kind of isolated. So just having
Right.
those spaces to gather can be healing. I hate that it has to be so like basic, but like, yeah, it's just hard. Like I'm in any other like doula space or birthwork space, and it's really hard for me because like people are misgendering me. They keep saying like women, pregnant women or moms or whatever. And
Right.
it's just like all those microaggressions and all the
Lack of
like erasure.
inclusivity. Right.
Yeah. And it's just like erasure, not only of like the people that I work with, like queer and trans people as a whole, but then also erasure of me as an individual, non-binary person, like, or have me having to like choose between, okay, do I want to be like hyper visible and try to explain what being non-binary is, or am I just like, do I have the energy for that? Because maybe I don't even have the
Right.
energy and I'm just trying to chill, but then it means I got to be misgendered all day because I don't have the energy to correct people. Or even if I wear my little they them button, people don't read it. So yeah, a lot of that. So just having
Right.
those gatherings and creating those spaces for each other and for
Work
ourselves,
in
it's
progress. Yeah.
yeah, it's necessary. And like, because a lot of us are under resourced, those things are inconsistent or those things are, it's hard to put a lot of resources into it because we don't necessarily even have the resources for like our day to day, let alone to, everybody chip in money to,
Right.
have a yoga teacher come or something like that. So we do what we can, but I wish there was more, and I wish we had the resources for more.
Right. I wish that as well. And maybe your center will start becoming some sense of fixing that, or at least involving in that. Whether you dream of that or not, I don't know. But just thinking about what could possibly change. And we don't have to have all the answers right now, but for certain, we can start with baseline respecting people's experiences and their pronouns and everything. Like I use she, her, they, them pronouns. I find a lot of people, depends. When people met me before, they call me they, them. People meet me now, they'll say she, her. But either way, and I used they, them for a while just myself. Like that was hard. People tend not to read pronoun pins, and like it's so easy to have your own sort of sense of what somebody else's gender is. I'm reading a book right now called Whipping Girl by Julia Serrano. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yeah.
But it's in fact it's fascinating. But anyway, yeah, right? Like that sense of like, oh, like this is how I see you. I'm going to place that on you. And I mean, we can't do that because again, like in your work, not only does it not show compassion and respect for the clients, but then it also for you interacting in those spaces, it's difficult. And so I really do hope that not only does that get better in terms of the people who are interacting with you or just the people who are mindful of being in this space, interacting with just the clients in general, but as well that these gatherings and these healing spaces become more than just, as you said, basic and more than just wanting to hear about somebody's day, but actually really get to what is actually going on for you and like how you all can be healed so that you can give the best to others. I'm actually taking a year off right now from medical school because I had to heal myself. And as a trans person in the medical community, it's so difficult. And so anyway, it's just so powerful to see what you're doing. And I'm so inspired. So it's been amazing speaking with you. This has been such a lovely, lovely, lovely conversation. This has just been so informative, healing for me, inspiring, all of the above. Spectacular. This is spectacular.
Thank you.
What you do is spectacular. I'm floored. I'm floored, honestly. I am so excited to see where things go in the future. I will be keeping up with the Kaluntu Center, and I hope that other people will check it out. I will definitely put it in the closing of the episode so people can check out the website. So, yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, for inviting me.
Right. Of course, you put your hand to your chest and like I feel the same way. I just feel like this conversation, like I feel like I see you, like you're seeing me in a way, like we're seeing each other, like you go.
Thank
So,
you.
alrighty, y'all. I'm going to end the recording now. Thank you for listening, watching.
Bye, y'all.
Many thanks to Khye for sharing their tremendous wisdom and efforts with us on combating the opposition to limit reproductive rights. I am floored by how they drove hours with one of their clients to their abortion in Maryland. They are truly helping people during some of their most uncertain and darkest times. And for those interested in conceiving, Khye told us how amazing it is to have an LGBTQ concordant provider that clients can appreciate speaking with and receiving support. I can imagine how beneficial this is for queer families wanting to build out their life. We're still facing a number of obstacles that may take years or seem impossible to change, while encouraging healthcare teams and allied healthcare professions to use pronoun-affirming language for pregnant patients will likely be achievable. The process for adoption for individuals in the LGBTQ community may be prohibited by obstacles such as homophobia or transphobia. Insurance companies can still dictate how infertility treatments and assisted reproductive technology is covered, some of them ignoring the social and psychological needs impacting queer people who also need coverage. At the same time, we are seeing birth control become more liberally offered as over-the-counter and available to minors, but this isn't true everywhere one goes. We have a lot to reckon with and communities to advocate for, especially intersectionally marginalized people who can't afford to care for children or have birth control if we are to have reproductive health access for everyone. Thank you for listening in and or watching. If you would like to read more about Khye's efforts, please visit www.kuluntu.center. That is KULUNTU. You can find references for our conversation in this episode's biography. If you want to hear more content, watch clips of our conversation, and more, let's continue to push the conversation more. On Instagram at Equerity Podcast, Twitter/X at EquerityPod, or on TikTok at BEQPod. If you had liked what you heard today, please give a quick star rating on your preferred listening platform, and definitely subscribe if you're on the YouTube. Take care and see you in the next episode.